about cutting back on expenses, the most common advice that you've probably heard is cut out that daily Starbucks Frappuccino and stop eating avocado toast, you stupid millennial, as if that will magically solve all of your problems and make you a millionaire overnight. This advice is overdone and quite silly, frankly, because few people go to Starbucks every single day, and avocados really aren't that expensive if you buy them in season, so cutting these out really won't make too much of a difference. But the sentiment behind this advice is what's important, and that's what we're going to focus on in today's video. Small, recurring purchases add up. The best advice I ever received on how to reduce my expenses was to cut my monthly outflows as much as possible. This means that if it hits the fan, you're not on the hook for a bunch of monthly bills. If you take this back to its most basic level, ideally your only recurring expenses would be for housing, food, and transportation. But of course, living life fulfilling only the basic requirements necessary for survival is really not that fulfilling of a life, so everybody will probably have some small luxuries in their budget. There are some expenses though that I think are just not worth the money, so without wasting any time, let's jump in. The first expense that I think everyone tends to have is an expensive phone plan. It's become fairly normalized in our society to have phone plans upwards of $100 a month, but this does not have to be the case. My phone bill is $17 a month, and this is thanks to something called MVNOs. MVNO stands for Mobile Virtual Network Operator, and these are companies that have agreements with mainstream carriers like AT&T and Verizon to use their infrastructure at wholesale cost. So the companies themselves don't own any infrastructure directly, which reduces their overhead significantly, passing those savings on to the consumer, which is you. And because you're using the exact same infrastructure that mainstream carriers use, you're not really having any noticeable difference in quality of service. MVNOs will typically require that you own your phone outright. But personally, I don't mind this because it reduces my mandatory monthly outflows even more. They're almost always month-to-month plans, meaning that you can cancel at any time, so you're not tied to a 2-year contract. Now, the big caveat to MVNO plans is that they very rarely offer unlimited data. And for some people, this might be a deal breaker, but for me personally, I didn't find that to be a huge lifestyle adjustment. I'm on Wi-Fi 95% of the time anyway, either at home or at work. I enjoy browsing platforms like Reddit, but when I'm on data, I just stick to text-only posts instead of pictures and video. I use Spotify, which is one of the few monthly subscriptions I think is totally worth the money, and I just download a bunch of songs to my phone to use on the go. And you can do the same thing with most audiobook or podcast services too. I also try not to scroll through social media that often, which has the added benefit of improving my mental state quite a bit. You can even download your city's map on Google Maps to reduce the amount of data usage you use when you're using it for directions. The point here is that there's a lot of different ways to reduce your data usage without really affecting your lifestyle all that much if you plan ahead. Remember how I just said that Spotify was worth its price? Well, there are a lot of subscription services that I really don't think are. Cutting cable is great. It's such a waste of money, and honestly, it hurts my soul to pay for something that's 30% ads anyway. But if you replace cable with 7 different streaming services, you're probably not saving any money. But there are still ways of watching your favorite shows without cutting them out completely. If you have Netflix and your friend has Hulu, maybe you come to an agreement where you share them so you have access to both. Just make sure it's not against the terms and conditions, but who reads those anyway? You can also just cancel the services that you're not currently using. Personally, I tend to binge shows, so for weeks at a time, I'm really only using one streaming service. It's kind of a pain, but you can just cancel the streaming services that you're not currently using, and then just renew them when you're ready to move on to the next show. The number of people that subscribed to HBO just for 2 months to watch Game of Thrones was, I'm sure, astronomical. So there's no reason you can't do this too with the other shows that you watch. The other subscription service that I see some people get are those monthly boxes that get delivered with a bunch of stuff in one category. Now, I try to be a minimalist, both financially and materialistically, so I realize that I might be biased here. But I really don't see the need to subscribe to a monthly subscription box just adding to your monthly outflows when you could just buy those items directly. The middleman always takes a cut, so between sourcing, packaging, and shipping those items to your doorstep, you could probably save more money if you just buy them yourself. Plus, it likely just fills your house with stuff that you really don't need and you're not 100% happy with anyway, because you didn't get to pick those things out. The final subscription service that I want to quickly mention is Amazon Prime. Canceling my Prime subscription saved me more than just the monthly fee. I found that I was making mindless, unnecessary purchases all the time just because it was so easy with the 2-day free shipping. Amazon is literally engineered to make you want to buy as much stuff as possible, so limiting my exposure to the platform really helped me reduce my unnecessary spending. And without Prime, free shipping requires you to spend at least $25. So small items will just sit in my cart until I have enough to qualify. More often than not, I end up removing them after a couple days because I realize I don't actually need that item. An absolute worst case, if I need something quickly, I just have a friend who has Prime to get it for me and I pay them back. I mentioned earlier that limiting my time browsing social media helps my mental state, but it also really helps me cut back on expenses. There was a time when I would follow a bunch of different influencers with great style, and I would end up buying all of the clothes and outfits that they wore in their posts. Every month I was spending a ridiculous amount of money on new clothes that I didn't need at all, but I was conditioned to want to buy them because they were filling up my social media feed. And I never felt satisfied because I was always comparing myself to influencers whose sole job is to make me want to spend more money. One day I went through my social media feed and just unfollowed every single account that I knew had this influence on me, leaving pretty much just friends and family. Almost instantly, I became satisfied with what I had again. I didn't have a desire to buy new clothes because I realized my wardrobe was fitting my needs perfectly. And these influences don't just come from Instagram influencers. Just by browsing social media, you're exposed to dozens and dozens of targeted ads that will just make you want to buy things that you don't really need. Even your email inbox isn't safe. You know all those junk emails that you get from stores that forced you to sign up for their mailing list after you bought a $5 t-shirt from them 8 years ago? Not only are they filling your inboxes with junk, they're forcing their brand into your subconscious so you're more likely to shop there in the future. And if you decide to buy something because you got an email saying that the store was having a sale, you didn't save money. You just spent money that you weren't planning on spending in the first place. So what I started doing about 6 months ago that's had a huge effect is every time I got a junk email, I would scroll down to the bottom of the email and hit unsubscribe. Slowly, over time, the junk emails stop coming. And here's a little extra tip if you have Gmail. If you add a plus sign to your email, those emails will still come to your account, but they'll be tagged with that specific email address. So you can just set up a rule that automatically dumps them in the spam folder. So for example, if you have to give your email address to something that you're pretty sure is going to send you junk email, just write your username plus junkmail@gmail.com. The next thing I want to talk about is food. Food is just unfortunately one of those expenses that we have to make no matter what. It's not like a house where you can put a bunch of money into it and potentially increase the value. With food, you eat it and it's gone. Even with a car, you can probably recoup some of what you paid for it if you choose to sell it, but nobody wants to buy your food after you're done with it. Unless you're into some really weird things, in which case, kudos to you for finding a niche and getting paid for it. But there are definitely ways to cut back on your food spending. It's fairly obvious, but worth mentioning anyway. Going out to eat all the time is probably a waste of money. Sure, it's convenient, but eating fast food all the time isn't great for your health or your wallet. Like anything, it's fine in moderation. But if every other meal that you're eating was prepared by someone else, you probably want to reconsider how you're spending your money. There are thousands upon thousands of accessible, easy cooking resources for essentially every kind of diet. Especially in the age of the internet, it does not have to be hard or expensive to learn to cook. I think a lot of people get scared of cooking because they think it has to be this big, elaborate process of preparing, cooking, and cleaning that takes hours and hours a day. But cooking really is what you make of it, so it can be as simple or as complex as you want. What helped me a lot was to create a meal plan. So every week, I write out the dinner plans for the entire week. Sometimes the plan is just to eat leftovers from the previous day, but because I planned it in advance, I'm less likely to order takeout when I get hungry. The other thing that helps me a lot was to have 2 or 3 go-to meals that don't take a lot of effort and you pretty much always have the ingredients on hand. So for me, that's spaghetti and meatballs. Everything in that recipe is either frozen or from the pantry, so I can pretty much always make it even if I haven't been to the store in a while. This makes it a lot harder for me to justify spending money on takeout because I know I can cook a tasty, relatively nutritious meal at home for fairly low effort. Finally, on average, Americans get less than 20% of their daily energy intake from meat. But meat can take up half of your grocery budget or more because it's so much more expensive per calorie than plant-based foods like grains and beans. Going vegetarian or vegan can save you a lot of money if you don't use too many animal substitute products. But this is a really big lifestyle change that's probably not realistic for most people. But even cutting meat out of 1 meal per week can save you a lot of money. One of my favorite meals ever is lentil stew that I cook fairly often. It costs something like $1 per serving because it's mostly just cheap vegetables and lentils, but it's both nutritious and delicious, which makes it a staple in our house. I do want to stress that everybody has different priorities in their budget, and some people might choose to spend their money on things that some people might think is a waste, and vice versa. The goal really is to just get rid of expenses that you don't personally find to be worth the money. For me, that bar is pretty high because I try to limit my monthly outflows as much as possible. Small expenses can really add up, especially if they recur each month. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button for the lovely YouTube algorithm. I make videos like this every week on on various personal finance topics, so be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on bell notifications so that you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.